All right, let's go. Number 10, the anarchic hand. Neuroscience tells us the body obeys the self. Every movement is a command executed. The hand moves because you told it to. But in clinical cases documented starting in 1981 and formally categorized in 1991 by neurologist Sergio Della Sala, patients with lesions to the corpus callosum watched one of their own hands act with complete independence, performing coordinated, sequential, intentional actions without any instruction from the conscious mind. The hand tore at their own clothing. It unbuttoned coats. It grabbed scalding objects. In one documented case, it closed around its owner's throat during sleeps, and the other hand had to physically fight it off. It is like discovering that your left arm has been making its own plans. Not randomly, not in spasm, with purpose. While you were busy being you, something else was busy being something else in the same body. The neuroscientist's best explanation is a loss of mutual inhibition between supplementary motor areas across hemispheres. A communication breakdown that frees one side to act without consent. The theory accounts for the mechanism. It does not account for the intent. The anarchic hand doesn't just move. It pursues goals. It reaches for specific objects. It opposes specific actions. The science admits it. A brain can harbor purposes that completely exclude consciousness from the room. The body is not a tool the self uses. It is apparently a coalition of systems. The self is not always invited to join. Number 9, the left hemisphere interpreter. The mind assumes it knows why it does things. Every choice, every preference, every moral conviction preceded by a deliberation you had access to. In 1978, researchers Michael Gazzaniga and Joseph Ledoux showed a split-brain patient 2 images simultaneously, a chicken claw to the left hemisphere, a snow scene to the right. The patient pointed to a chicken image with his right hand and a snow shovel with his left. When asked about the shovel, which his left hemisphere had no information about whatsoever, it answered without hesitation. The shovel was for cleaning out the chicken coop. It is like a press secretary who wasn't in the meeting confidently explaining the meeting's outcome to the press. Except the press secretary is you, and you never know there was a meeting. Gazzaniga named this mechanism the interpreter, a neural network in the left hemisphere whose dedicated function is to monitor the body's actions and retroactively construct explanations for them. The terrifying implication is this. The interpreter was found in a split brain, where the 2 hemispheres could be experimentally isolated. In a healthy brain, there is no such isolation. The science cannot establish where interpretation ends and genuine deliberation begins. It cannot tell you how much of your moral reasoning, your identity, your daily motivation is fabricated in real time after the fact by a system whose only job is to make sure the story sounds coherent. You are not the one thinking. You are the one being told what was thought. Number 8, general anesthesia. Medicine assumes it knows how to switch consciousness off. The patient goes under, the surgeon operates, the patient wakes up, a controlled disappearance. But here is what the science actually says. Despite revolutionizing medicine since William T. Morton's first public ether demonstration in 1846, 180 years of practice, there is still no unified scientific theory explaining how anesthetic drugs suspend consciousness. And the statistical consequence of that ignorance is this. Between 1 and 2 patients out of every 1,000 undergoing general anesthesia experience intraoperative awareness, full conscious experience, in the middle of surgery, while the body is completely paralyzed by neuromuscular blockers and cannot signal distress to anyone in the room. It is like building a light switch for 180 years, selling it to billions of people, and never once understanding the mechanism that turns the light off, while occasionally the light stays on, and no one outside the room can tell. Alternative theories have targeted lipid bilayer disruption, GABA-A receptor binding, and slow electrical oscillations in the brainstem, each partial, each contested. What collapsed the field's confidence entirely is this single fact. Anesthetic compounds alter or suppress activity in organisms with no nervous system at all. Plants, bacteria. If consciousness were simply a product of neural firing, anesthetics shouldn't touch anything without neurons. They do. The scientists do not know what this means. They admit it. The surgery proceeds. The silence of the body tells you nothing about the mind inside it. Number 7. Capgras syndrome. When you recognize someone you love, the recognition carries weight, warmth, the feeling of a person, not just a face. In a study conducted in 1997 by Harden, Ellis, and colleagues, 5 patients with Capgras syndrome were shown photographs of family members while their galvanic skin response was measured. They recognized the faces. They could name them, describe them, identify specific features accurately. But the electrodermal response, the unconscious arousal signal the body generates for familiar, meaningful stimuli, was completely flat. No reaction, as if the person in the photograph were a stranger. And here is what the brain does with that silence. It doesn't generate indifference. It generates a delusion. It decides the person is a double, a perfect replica, an imposter who has replaced the real one. The delusion is sometimes so complete and the emotional logic so internally consistent that it ends in violence. Patients assaulting or killing people they can correctly identify in detail as their own family. Researchers, including Vilayanur Ramachandran, locate the fault in the disconnection between the fusiform cortex, which decodes facial identity, and the limbic system, which assigns emotional significance. The anatomical explanation is credible. What it cannot explain is why the absence of warmth forces the construction of an elaborate paranoid narrative, rather than simply producing emotional numbness. The brain does not experience the void as a void. It fills it with a threat. The barrier between love and paranoid suspicion is a single electrical circuit. It can be severed without warning. Number 6, Cotard syndrome. The certainty of being alive is the bedrock of everything. Before belief, before identity, before thought, there is the immediate, unquestionable fact that you exist. Formally described in 1880 by psychiatrist Jules Cotard, the syndrome that bears his name produces a stable, unshakable conviction in patients that their organs have rotted, that they have no blood, no brain, or that they have already been dead for weeks. A statistical analysis of 100 patients with the diagnosis found that 45% experienced the absolute negation of their own physical existence. The remaining 55% experienced the inverse paradox, the delirious certainty that they were immortal, condemned to walk the earth forever as a living corpse. Functional neuroimaging reveals severe hypoactivity in the right frontoinsular cortex and deep disruption of the default mode network, the system responsible for self-referential processing. The neuroscience can show you which regions are underperforming. What it cannot explain is how a brain that is actively thinking, generating complex language, maintaining consistent beliefs across days and weeks, engaging with the external world, can simultaneously sustain, as a stable epistemological conviction, the belief in its own non-existence. The brain is proving its own aliveness in the very act of insisting it is dead. The science calls this irresolvable. It is. And it means that the sense of being real, the most fundamental layer of subjective experience, is not a perception anchored in biology. It is a construction, one the biology can simply stop providing. Number 5, Anton Babinski syndrome. Blindness, at minimum, is presumed to announce itself. Total absence of vision produces darkness, the experience of seeing nothing. The blind person knows they cannot see. Anton Babinski syndrome is a neurological condition in which patients with cortical blindness, caused by bilateral lesions to the occipital lobe, deny with complete conviction that they cannot see. They walk into furniture, they fall, they reach for door frames that are not there, and they explain every collision. They describe objects, colors, people in the room who are not present through use, with specific detail, unshaken by any physical evidence of their blindness. The theoretical explanation involves a disconnection between the damaged visual cortex and the monitoring networks in the parietal lobe. With no signal from the eyes and no working circuit to flag the absence, the language regions invent. They produce imagery, they generate description, and the brain accepts the confabulation as objective reality with such completeness that it overrides the feedback from a body colliding with a physical world. What the science cannot decipher is the depth of that acceptance. These patients are not guessing. They are not compensating. They are certain. The pain from the collisions does not register as evidence. The brain's simulation of sight is more real to it than the damage the body is sustaining from contact with actual objects. Everything you have ever seen was a construction. Anton Babinski is simply the version where the construction continues ad hoc, the input disappears. Number 4, the Lorber paradox. The brain is considered the physical substrate of intelligence. More cortex means more capacity. Volume and cognitive function are assumed to move together. In 1980, pediatrician John Lorber presented a case to the medical community that has never been resolved. A mathematics student at the University of Sheffield. Measured IQ of 126. Normal social functioning. Normal academic achievement. His CT scans showed a skull filled almost entirely with cerebrospinal fluid. Severe hydrocephalus had compressed his cortex to a layer less than 1 millimeter thick. A healthy human cortex measures approximately 4.5 centimeters. This student was operating at high cognitive function on less than 2% of the cortical tissue the theory said was necessary to do it. It is like running a fully operational city with architecture, infrastructure, communication networks, art, inside a structure the size of a single room when the theory required a continent. The dominant counter-argument invokes functional redundancy. The surviving tissue compensated by taking on all function. Neuroanatomist Patrick Wall rejected this explanation publicly, calling it intellectual escapism, a way of saying the brain must have found a solution without explaining how or why or what that solution actually was. The redundancy hypothesis cannot predict which functions survive in which patients with which lesion. It describes an outcome. It explains nothing. If the complexity of a mind can live inside a skull of fluid, the physical architecture of the brain becomes a secondary detail in a story the biology has not yet told. Number 3, terminal lucidity. The destruction of neurons is assumed to be permanent. Alzheimer's, advanced dementia, massive, progressive neural loss that imprisons the mind in an irreversible decline. The person who was there is understood to be unreachable. In 2009, German biologist Michael Nahm coined the term terminal lucidity to describe something observational data had documented but science had not yet named. Patients in the final stage of severe dementia, patients who had not recognized family members in years, who had lost language and orientation and the coherent experience of self suddenly returning. Full memory, full clarity, recognizing every person in the room, saying goodbye with intention, knowing they were dying. Observational studies estimate this occurs in approximately 10% of patients with profound dementia. Of those who experience it, 84% die within 1 week. Between 42% and 43% die within 24 hours. The leading hypothesis involves terminal surges of neurotransmitters and peptides driven by pre-death physiological stress, temporarily reactivating remnant synaptic circuits in the prefrontal medial cortex and hippocampus. The hypothesis is theoretically coherent. It does not explain how circuits that are not merely dormant but structurally destroyed, riddled with amyloid plaques, with neurofibrillary tangles, with decades of documented degeneration, can sustain, even for hours, a unified, complex, fully functional consciousness. The science requires that cognition scale with structural integrity. These patients are the evidence that it sometimes does not. The identity returned from a brain that had, by every available measure, lost the capacity to contain it. Number 2, choice blindness. The mind holds as foundational the belief that its choices are its own, that desire precedes decision, that when you choose something, you know what you chose and why. In 2005, psychologist Petter Johansson and colleagues published research in Science in which participants examined pairs of photographs and selected the face they found more attractive. Using sleight-of-hand card manipulation, researchers secretly replaced the chosen photograph with the rejected one, and then asked subjects to explain their preference. Only 13% of participants detected the substitution. The remaining 87% accepted the image they had explicitly not chosen as their deliberate selection, and then produced detailed, confident, introspective accounts of why they found that specific face more attractive. 87% did not simply fail to notice the switch, they defended it. They generated memories of a preference they never had. They felt certainty about a desire the experiment have fabricated for them. The choice blindness paradigm exposes what cognitive psychology calls the introspection illusion, the belief that you have direct access to the processes that generated your own decisions. The science has no method to establish whether that access has ever been real. It cannot tell you, for any given choice you believe you made, whether the decision preceded the awareness of it, or whether the awareness was simply the story constructed afterward to explain an outcome that was already fixed. You are a master of self-falsification. The choices you have defended most passionately in your life are the ones you should interrogate most carefully. Number 1, the preset decision. You are in a room, sitting still, calm, no pressure. You can move your finger whenever you want. Left hand or right hand, any moment you choose, completely free. The decision is yours, and only yours, to make. This is the experiment John Dylan Haynes ran in 2008. Volunteers pressed a button with their left or right hand at any spontaneous moment of their choosing, while recording the letter displayed on a screen at the precise instant they became conscious of their decision. The fMRI scans of their brains told a different story. Haynes' computers, reading activity in the frontopolar cortex and anterior parietal cortex, could predict with statistically significant accuracy which button the subject would press, up to 10 seconds before the subject was aware of any decision at all. 10 seconds. Not milliseconds. Not the 550 milliseconds Benjamin Libet measured in 1983 in his foundational readiness potential experiments. 10 seconds of neural computation, silently constructing the outcome of a choice that the conscious mind had not yet begun to experience as a choice. The standing defense is the veto hypothesis. The idea that even if unconscious processes prepare a decision, the conscious mind retains the power to cancel it in the final moment. The neuroscience cannot refute this. It also cannot confirm it. It has no empirical method to determine whether the veto itself is free or whether the veto was also decided 10 seconds earlier by the same system. What the science can say is this: every time you have sat with a decision, every time you have felt the weight of choosing, the sense of deliberation, the belief that the outcome was genuinely open, the neural infrastructure of the choice was already assembled. You arrived at the conclusion the brain had reached before you started thinking. The subjective experience of free will is real. The neuroscience does not dispute that. What it cannot rule out, and what the evidence from Haynes' lab forces into serious consideration, is that the experience is real, the way a newspaper headline is real, accurate, vivid, and printed after the events it described. You are not making decisions. You are being informed of them. The you that chose is the one you will never meet. If that was disturbing, the next one is worse.